Welcome out to another episode of It's All Been Checked Before. This time, Parallax, a Voyager episode on It's All Been Checked Before. I don't even have a segue from Parallax. I don't know what that is, but if I did, I'd say, hey, follow us on Facebook. It's All Been Checked Before. Spelled just like it sounds, just like you see it everywhere on the internet. It's All Been Checked Before. Follow us there. Have a lot of fun out there. Giggle at us, sneer at us, but more than that, hey, engage with us. You have some different thoughts? Throw them at us. I'm fine hearing them in person as well, but let's hear from all of you. And if you're doing it over on Reddit, hey, share it with us on Facebook, and everybody can go over and pile on. It's All Been Checked Before on Facebook, and it's All Been Checked Before right now. This is Parallax from Voyager. It's All Been Checked Before.
Welcome out to another episode of It's All Been Checked Before. Some of you regular hosts are here.
This is Steven.
Jimmy-Jerome and our going to be regular Voyager co-host.
Hi, I'm Shane.
Shane!
Hey.
Shane's back! After his stellar, critically lauded guest spot in Caretaker. I say with no irony, even though the episode won't be released for 6 months.
The Reddit threads are already up. So.
Right. Voyager is Shane's favorite, so he's told me that he wants to be here for every episode, or if he can't make the recording, he'll send his thoughts so we can include them.
Yeah, a little synopsis. So I won't be here for the next one because it's a Monday. So a little synopsis. But I got my Voyager blue background.
Very nice.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. So yeah, it's exciting to have a new fresh voice in the mix.
Yes.
Regularly for this show. And then Shane has not agreed to watch any episodes of DS9, so the DS9 weeks you're just gonna have to miss him.
Yeah.
Until he gives it a shot, and then he's gonna binge it all because I keep telling him it's the best track. But
then you'll know what you're listening to in case you're like, is it Voyager or DS9 this week? You'll be able to tell.
That's true.
Shane's there. It's Voyager for now. Let's give our first impressions of the episode Parallax. Go for it.
I'll jump in. Yeah, I thought it was fine. Yeah, we're still doing some of the figuring out everybody and the Maquis and all that stuff. So this one was focused pretty much on our lady Torres there. So I thought some good development of that kind of stuff and how this thing's going to work moving forward, and some other interesting concepts. So I thought it was, I'll just say fine for now. We'll see as we go through. Maybe I'll feel better or worse about it. But yeah. I will say, just in a general note, 3 episodes in, I'm still very much in that looking forward to each episode kind of a thing of like, because I'm enjoying the characters so far. That's for sure. So, and not surprising, I'm in love with Janeway. She's great.
Yeah, I mean, overall, this felt like a pretty classic Star Trek episode. A crazy space thing happened, and you weren't sure until sort of the end what was happening. Was it a duplicate? Was it a mirror? We don't know. And then, so it was a really cool, just space adventure.
I completely agree, Shane. I think it felt like a classic Trek story to me, especially TNG era of here's this spatial anomaly. We don't know what it is. It's causing us the problems. And they did a lot of like on location filming for the pilots. This definitely felt like a cost savings episode of let's bottle it as much as we can. And next Voyager episode, I happen to know they did some on location filming for that as well. So it definitely felt like they were budget saving this week. I liked it more than I thought. So I think I mentioned that when Voyager first premiered, I did record a bunch of the first half of the first season on VHS and watch them over and over, but I must have missed this one because I have seen it, but I think I've only seen it like once. This is not one of the ones I watched repeatedly. The next Voyager episode is, so I think I must have missed this one somehow with my recording between Caretaker and this, both of which I watched a million times. I was very into the Torres Janeway relationship and the idea of the conflict with the Maquis, which I think I've said before, I wish the show had leaned more into. So this was a really satisfying episode for me. Plus, we get the classic space mystery. So I'm not going to say it hung the moon or was one of the best episodes ever, but it was not. I think we talked a lot about how Next Gen Season 1 was kind of rough. And I mentioned that DS9 Season 1 was pretty rough, although it didn't end up being as rough as I thought it was. I'm wondering if Voyager's gonna be the same way because I have said I think Voyager season one's kind of rough, but this wasn't to me rough. It was maybe middle of the pack of a strong season of Next Gen, but like a good episode of Star Trek that I would
Yeah,
not mind watching again.
I think the science or the meat of it, the what they were encountering
Mhm.
was the kind of time loop kind of stuff we've seen before. But I thought that was interesting, and all the mumbo jumbo they were talking, especially the way it played with the Janeway and Torres, I thought was cool. The overarching part of the episode where it's like, oh, Torres is now the chief engineer and all that stuff. I thought that was like, all right. I thought those beats were pretty predictable, but I thought her and the captain connecting and a few of the other things weren't as predictable. So, but yeah.
As a Voyager newbie, did you know Torres was going to be the chief engineer before the end of this episode?
No, no.
Okay.
I didn't know until this episode started, and then I knew very early on she will be.
Did you realize she was a main character?
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. So
But I
that's
didn't
kind
know
of a
that
big
was gonna be her
giveaway.
assignment. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
but 5 minutes into this, I'm like, oh, she'll be running it soon.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. Like, because the previews and the posters certainly featured her, especially that like exchange between Chakotay and Torres, where Chakotay's like, or Torres is like, "Who is she to make decisions for us? She's the captain from
Yeah.
Caretaker." It's like, oh no, definitely, obviously, and Carrie is not in any of the trailers or posters. He is in a number of episodes. This is
Yeah.
over a number of seasons. He was in the pilot. He was in Caretaker. He was in this. He's in a couple more episodes of season one, and then like one episode a season for a few seasons. He's not as often as O'Brien, but he's somebody that we see every once in a while. I kind of wish Carrie was in the show more, honestly. From these two episodes, he didn't get much of Caretaker, but I liked his
Hmm.
conflict with Bellata. I think
Yeah.
that would have been a good element to keep, as if we
Hmm.
saw more conflict with them, even with them. To get ahead of ourselves, bearing the hatch at the end of the episode, I wanted more of that dynamic.
I
I
do
like
like
Josh Clark that plays Carrie, and
well
it
with
would have
the
been
Janeway
satisfying.
Chakotay interplay, the way that
Chakotay or
Chakotay.
the way she was saying it, I can't
She was
even
she's
mimic
overdoing it.
so much.
Yeah.
So
Like
much.
I get it out of if he wants to say it, that's fine. But I feel like it's like when, like Barcelona. Like,
Well, we
don't
also
say it
know
like that. Come on.
we also know their Native American consultant wasn't actually Native
Yeah.
American, was a big fraud. So
Yeah.
anything that serves the Native American backstory, we have to treat as suspect in this series, unfortunately. So we get to the beginning of the episode, and they need some repairs, but they don't have a
First off,
starbase.
the opening shot of that ship. Oh, so sleek, so sexy. I love it.
Cool ship.
It's a good looking ship.
I agree. The Intrepid class is sharp. I know a lot of people love the Galaxy class, the Enterprise D, but to me it was always a little too boxy, a little bit too unwieldy, too wide.
Yeah.
It made sense to me as a ship that carries 1,000 people and is more of a cruise line than a ship that's traveling and exploring. And Voyager is a traveling, exploring ship.
Yeah. Yeah.
Chakotay says when I'm already throwing Torres in the brig. We're 75
Sick
from
bay?
75 years away from the nearest court. Are you really going to hold her in the brig for that long? I enjoyed that. The idea of
I mean, really, that is something Voyager's gonna have to deal with more. There is definitely not Torres, but Voyager will deal with the aspect of what if we have a crewman that we can't control?
Yeah.
What do we do with them? Because we can't just leave them in the brig for 75 years. Future episode problems. We'll get to those.
You can't, a message to Starfleet would take 12 years to get there and back. There'll be no help as well.
At this point, they're not in communication with Starfleet.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
correct.
Yeah.
So they may or may not eventually get there. We'll see. Were you disappointed or surprised that we did not get Torres punching Carrie? It was just Carrie in sickbay with his nose bleeding saying he was punched.
It took me a while because I was trying to, until they actually said, yeah, she punched him. I was like, well, what actually happened to him? Yeah, she hit him with something, ram him into something. It was
Just was a little bit weird they skipped the actual scene of it going down, in my opinion.
yeah. I guess that way we didn't have to know how good or bad she was. And
Save money on stunt coordinators,
I will say my natural, well, it cuts both ways because my natural inclination is to be into Klingon women, but to not be into Klingons in general. So I was like, oh boy, great.
She's only half Klingon.
Oh, well, that's true. So maybe that explains it. But
And unlike Spock, she doesn't reject her human half. If anything, there's a lot of times where Torres feels like she'd rather just be fully human and doesn't like her Klingon half.
well,
Spoilers, Jen.
No, I think in this episode she says like, "Oh, that was my Klingon blood. I can't control it."
Yeah.
and maybe I'll hit that. Speaking of hitting, maybe I'll hit that now. She's a great engineer, so is it, oh, you're so sharp. We're going to overlook you assaulting a fellow officer. Like, we know there's going to be conflict, but
yeah. I was really expecting it to come up as part of the discussion of we're going to give you a trial as chief, but if you hit somebody else, you're done.
Right.
And I was a little bit surprised. They were just like, nope, she can be chief engineer. But she is a genius. I do think Janeway makes a really good point in this episode. I know this is skipping ahead a little bit, but like her saying that part of the job of chief engineer is to be a genius engineer, but part of it is people management. If we compare it back to Next Gen, Geordi's a brilliant engineer. Barclay is an even more genius engineer, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
But Barclay has no people skills, so Barclay could never be chief engineer. And I know Shane is familiar with Barclay, even if you've only watched Voyager and not Next Gen.
Yeah.
But spoiler. But yeah, I think there is a personality thing, and I would have liked a little more exploration of can B'Elanna's keep her personality under control. I think she gave us a couple signs of it.
Yeah.
I just think Janeway maybe should have said it a little more explicitly to her. Like, if you keep crossing this line, or Chakotay. Maybe Janeway defers to Chakotay and lets him say it, but somebody need to tell her, you're not going to get to keep this job if you can't keep it in line.
Because we never hear that. We never hear like what you did. Well, I guess we do hear what you did was wrong, but we never. Yeah. And maybe we don't have to. But I just wanted somebody to say you can't go around hitting people. Period. I mean,
yeah.
I guess for us when we were 3 or 4, somebody told us ideally, but Klingon world, I know it's different, and there's honor and all that stuff.
Well, and like Chakotay said, sometimes in the Maquis you just have to hit somebody to get them to listen. Which, okay, that's the way it works.
I like that. So after Chakotay talks to Tuvok and talks about possibly locking her up, he runs into 2 other Maquis. One is named Seska. Yeah, I know. I was excited too. Means nothing to Steven. Seska is a reoccurring character who will be in the show a bunch for a while. There were 2 Maquis. The other one, I don't know who that person is. I don't know if they're in a second episode. I'm guessing through IMDb, that's probably Jarvan. But in terms of who Jarvan is, it looks like he was in one episode of Voyager. So if it's Jarvan, that's Seska, though, played by Martha Hackett. Like I said, we're in for a bunch of her. She's best known for this role, her reoccurring role in Voyager, as well as the movie Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day from 2014, The Bye Bye Man 2017, and Kiss Kiss Bang Bang in 2005, where she played Pistol Woman. She has 50 credits, the most recent being 2020, which at this point seems like she may have disappeared from acting. That was a full 4 years ago. But yeah, I won't say she's a familiar face to me, but of course I know who Seska is, and I was excited to see her pop up. And not the first time we've seen her in Star Trek, because in the Deep Space Nine Season 3 premiere that we reviewed just a few months ago, The Search Part 1 and Part 2, she was T'Rul, the Romulan observer that was assigned to the Defiant. So I don't know if she seemed familiar to you, Stephen, but we just saw her in a 2-parter.
Yeah. Maybe she was Seska in disguise. Undercover Maquis.
Interesting. I feel like you almost gave something away there, Shane. But no, definitely not. She was definitely a Romulan in those 2 episodes.
That's the tough part about Star Trek sometimes is you're like, oh man, it's that actor. Well, did they? Nope, they just cast the same actor twice in 2 different roles.
Interesting note, just by chance, I came across a Facebook post today where they were talking about a scene later in Voyager where we see Admiral Owen Paris's office. Sorry if that spoils something. Tom Paris's dad. But the picture they had on his desk of Tom Paris is actually a picture of Nick Locarno from the Next Generation episode. because it's the same actor in the same
Yeah.
cadet uniform.
Uh-huh.
And the Facebook post was like, somebody give me an in-canon explanation for why Admiral Paris has Nick Licardo's picture on his desk.
Well,
I have read a bunch since we recorded Caretaker, and our beloved guest Sean was correct that it was all about rights and not wanting to pay the writer of First Duty, which is rough and cringy and makes me ashamed of 90s Star Trek. But anyway, so yeah, the Maquis, they're saying Seska and the other person, foreshadowing, saying mutiny, let's mutiny, and Chakotay shuts them down. I think there was some really good character development from the Maquis stuff. I again, this episode makes me wish they'd carried the Maquis stuff more forward in this season. I could be wrong. I could be forgetting some things. I know I've seen, I think, all of the first season, but I feel like the Maquis stuff, the conflict kind of disappears quickly, and I want more of this. I want people dissatisfied and wanting to mutiny and wanting to question Janeway's leadership and see how that tests Chakotay. And I really wanted to see how it tests Torres, which we never got to see because Chakotay has made his choice. Torres, especially before the end of this episode, doesn't seem like she has. That she may be more apt. Like, I think they could have done a whole B plot with her agreeing with the mutineers and considering mutiny that they didn't do.
I think too much of that would get old. Like especially on a 24 episode season or something like that. Like too much would be. I know what you're saying. I do also wish they would have drawn it out a little longer, if I recall. But yeah, I think too much more, and it probably would have gotten a little overbearing. But maybe not.
I wouldn't want them to do it for 7 seasons, but I would like them to have been a larger part of the season.
The first season, yeah. No, and that would make sense too.
And I don't know what grade this happens now because I'm 100 years old, but when you go from elementary school to junior high, and so a bunch of schools get pushed together, and for me, junior high was, I think for everyone, junior high is terrible at different degrees. For anyone who that was the high point of their life, that's bad news. I feel bad for them. But
worst years of my childhood for sure.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. That's when I really got into Star Trek. But yeah, so it kind of makes me think of that. Like initially it's like, who are these people? And then, by 8th grade or whatever, or later that year, it's like, okay, then the jump to high school, then when the junior highs come together, or whatever, But yeah, so it makes sense. But I'm with you, Jimmy, a little bit more maybe. But
this episode did a decent job. I wish future episodes did more of it.
Yeah, I have a note in here. Mommy and Daddy are fighting. Was when Chakotay and Janeway. It's like, behind private. At least he was respectful enough to like, all right, we'll talk about this in private, and then they had a little bit of what I would have maybe expected more in the first episode of like some conflict, but now we're getting it here.
Well, he didn't really get to be first officer till the end of the first episode. So I get your point. Like maybe they had the conflict as they're playing the mission, and he's not our first officer yet. But I did want more of the conversation in this episode where he's just like, well, she's the best engineer. She should be chief. Consider her. And he did not really make the case the way he should have. As fully.
Well, and the thing is, I mean, he doesn't know the crew. He doesn't know the Voyager crew. He only knows his Maquis crew. So like, he's got a point in a way, although he did try to do a little sly thing on the bridge there where just like
that was not good first officer behavior. That was underhanded.
A little bit.
Well, and I guess it's just natural for him. And I didn't think of this last week, but since I haven't talked about Balance of Terror probably in at least 2 weeks, it is kind of the inverse of that, of like, oh, in another world we could have been friends. It's like, guess what? You better be friends now, or otherwise it's going to be a real long 75 years of getting back.
Yeah.
I feel like you could tell Chakotay was a Starfleet officer. Like right away, he slips back into that pattern.
Yeah.
Somebody that left on principle, but in this case, the principle's not going to apply to the situation. I do agree with Shane's point of Chakotay knows the Maquis, so he knows Torres is brilliant, and he may know, because he's been Starfleet, he may know Torres is more brilliant than other engineers he served with. He doesn't know Carrie at all. Carrie could be a genius. Yeah. And I know Carrie's not a chief engineer, but I think you should get to know Carrie for half a second before he says B'Elanna's better.
10 seconds in, you realize Carrie's so.
Oh, yeah, no. He is a good Starfleet man at the end with his apology and acceptance. Almost too much. I wanted more of him being petty. But yeah, I think he's a decent character, and we can tell right away he's not as talented. I just, again, take a second, see. But Chakotay's point of you can't just make me your Tokamaki and expect the rest of the Maquis to fall in line is extremely valid. And on a ship where you're missing half your senior staff, it makes absolute sense to argue that there should be a second Maquis senior staff, whether it's Torres or somebody else.
I had that down too. Also, and you guys kind of answered this, but yeah, one of my questions was, is Carrie an idiot or is he just not as brilliant as her? I think more towards the second part, because I think he's a competent Starfleet.
He's competent. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's no Geordi LaForge or Belana Torres, but I think he's competent.
Or, Montgomery Scott, of course.
Well, and then, Janeway said this to Chakotay, where she said he's next in line. Like, okay, but being next in line shouldn't automatically be your qualification. If someone's better, then they're better, and that should go for pretty much everything.
I liked the conflict between Janeway and Chakotay over this plot. I think it wasn't as well developed as it should have been.
Yeah.
So let's blame the writer for that, because we haven't talked about who wrote this yet. Teleplay was by Brannon Braga, who was one of the head writers. We're very familiar with him from Next Gen, writing Next Gen movies, co-partnered with Ron D. Moore of DS9 and Battlestar Galactica fame. But the storybook was by Jim Trombetta, who's best known as being a writer for DS9, 5 episodes of DS9, this 1 episode of Voyager, 2 episodes of Miami Vice in the 80s, and 3 episodes of The Equalizer in the 80s. This story by is his final credit on IMDb.
Mm-hmm.
So I love TV writers that just write for all kinds of stuff. It's like
he's got 11. He wrote for 11 different shows, starting with Miami Vice, ending with Voyager. He did write 3 episodes of The Flash starring John Wesley Shipp, which I can't watch.
I very much enjoyed that back then.
So
I watched that.
Yeah.
DS9 is the show he wrote the most of. And it was all in seasons 1 and 2. Season 1, he wrote The Forsaken. I don't even remember what that was. These are all story by except for 1. He only helped with the teleplay of playing God in season 2. Story by did The Forsaken, Rivals, The Alternate, and Paradise. Those aren't their strongest episodes. Yeah. So, utility writer, I guess.
Yeah.
None of those stand out to me. I remember that episode. So we have the senior staff meeting. Neelix and Kes burst in, and Senior Talaxian and Senior Ocumpin and want to be included. You definitely get that Neelix is the comic relief already on this show.
Yeah.
Then Kes, I feel like this is the stereotypical trope of a couple on TV in this era of a bumbling husband and the smart wife who gets things done. Because Neelix is like, let me help. I can cook things maybe, or just tell you some stuff. And Kes is like, nope, we're going to change these decks to the hydroponics bays. We're going to grow this. We're going to grow that. We're going to feed your crew. We're going to, Kes has it together. And Neelix is just bumbling.
All I could think about when she started talking about hydroponics was that she worked at a space water beds and stuff and worked with hydroponics. She's mostly just growing pot, but she knows it can be used for other agricultural things. I did look, and maybe we talked about this last week, but that is a wig that she's wearing.
So is Janeway. That's a wig too.
Oh, is that right? Oh, that's right. Yeah. But I know you guys didn't like it, but I still like her. I like her hair. Anyway.
Not a Kes fan.
Yeah.
But I thought she, in this episode.
From what I hear from the internet, you're not alone.
No, I think she was definitely least popular character of this main cast. And she was only 20 when she did this. Ethan Phillips, who played Neelix, was 39, and she was 20 or 21 when they played this. Which, for her species, it makes sense, but...
they turned around, though, and then the next scene, I mean, granted, it's a space thing, but she had to be explained, exposition-y what the thing was, which you always have to have a dumb character here and there to really explain, because obviously the senior staff know what it is, more or less.
Yeah, I wrote that down too. I bumped on that we have to have a character that's naive of this part. I think she's already proven in the previous scene that she's smart. Mm-hmm. She's just not familiar with some of the context of what they're talking about. The hydroponics thing is really useful and valuable contribution. So I don't think she's dumb. She's just
Yeah.
not familiar with what an event horizon is. And then Neelix is dumb, but does know what event horizon is, so has to show that he's contributing in some way.
Yeah, I feel like that's his thing. Is I can do this.
Yeah. Bumbling man who's far less valuable than Kes as a member of this crew, even though he's going to be the one that sticks around and she's. But in terms of the hydroponics, it does beg the question how the replicators exactly work, which I think we've touched on in other episodes with other Treks, in that they're running out of food. So there's some material the replicator uses. It doesn't make it out of thin air. But they haven't mentioned running out of other things, supplies and parts and things. So there's probably a difference between organic matter for the replicator versus non-organic matter and how that works. And I don't know. As far as I know, Voyager doesn't get too heavy into it, but the running out of food thing is something that's relevant. And replicator rations and all that is going to be relevant to the plot going forward. So I appreciate being introduced this early in the plot. I want to make Paris the field medic because he basically had 2 classes of pre-med, which, okay, great, fine, whatever, but he's the pilot, and this ship is constantly traveling. And I get that it's probably mostly running on autopilot, but do you really want your primary pilot to be the one that's the nurse? Can't you pick anybody else of the like 75, 80 Starfleet? Or I think with the Maquis, it's like 150 people on board. There's nobody better qualified. Or as qualified that you took 2 classes once that you could send down instead of Paris. It just doesn't make sense to have your primary pilot be the nurse.
Well, and he mentioned
field medic. Same
they
thing.
Mentioned something about a hangnail in here. Memory Alpha confirmed this. So way back in the Menagerie Part 1, they say McCoy has to beam back up due to an unspecified medical emergency, and that's when he's like, somebody's probably got a hangnail. And then in DS9 Whispers, Miles O'Brien's replicant also mentions a hangnail, and I mentioned that episode. I thought that was a reference to that. So I wonder if this is also a reference back to the hangnail.
Original series.
I can't think of. I don't know if I've ever heard a hangnail reference anywhere else in any media other than real life. I'm sure I have, but anyway. So I like that was mentioned here. I did
already mention the exchange on the bridge where Chakotay calls Torres first, and then Janeway immediately calls Carrie. I mean, it was Chakotay undermining Janeway, and then Janeway immediately undermines him back. Definitely a little power struggle going on there.
Yeah.
The emergency medical hologram feels underused because he has to do day-to-day tasks instead of just medical stuff. And they really needed to think about bedside manner. I get that this whole thing is new of having an emergency medical hologram, and eventually we'll see the origin of it, of how it came about, but I just think somebody should have thought bedside manner before you rolled it out onto a starship.
It's that thing we've talked about before. It's like, who programmed this? And
we will see that.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, if you think about it in context, it was only meant to be an emergency, so you got to imagine that like there's no time for pleasantries after the fact. It's I'm going to stitch this up, I'm going to fix this, and move on to the next injured crew member, and doesn't really need it bedside. Plus, you got to imagine
they're constantly in triage. That's a good point.
How much space that personality is going to take up in data. You know, like
I thought his whole storyline in this of shrinking. I got the context of how it connected to everything else, but super cheesy, and the effects were even cheesier.
Very bad effects with him being smashed and stretched instead of shorter. I wish they just made him shorter. But in terms of once we see the origin of how the Doctor came to be the way he is, it really, to me, is like a case of a scientist inventing something, and then we just rolled it out without testing real-world implications. And I think you probably already get that impression now, even without the backstory. But that's exactly what happened. And it's, man, I think Starfleet by the 24th century ought to be a little smarter than that, to not just roll it out before it's, The Janeway Torres meeting was interesting in that Janeway was trying to give her a chance and Torres was shooting herself in the foot.
She's probably used to Maquis, leadership where you've got to fight for your, position and.
To your triage reference, it's the Maquis are never they're the rebels, so they're not hanging out in a ready room and all that stuff. They're scrapping.
No, but I think it's, and I understand that Torres has a chip on her shoulder that she might not recognize immediately that Janeway's trying to give her a chance. But I do think, to Janeway's credit, she is beyond patient with that meeting.
I agree
And I
with
think
you.
a lesser captain would have already dismissed her and written her off before Janeway does. I think Janeway went above and beyond to take Chakotay's advice under advisement.
I had two takeaways from that meeting. One was, and since this was January 95, I wrote the B'Elanna Janeway meeting. That went well. So I thought that was in honor of Chandler Bing, R.I.P. Matthew Perry.
Aw.
But I also
Brought the
thought
conversation down.
a bunch of the conversations were, these people really want to attend meetings. I was like, who are these people? They're like, I need to be at that meeting. I really want to be at that meeting. I really want to be at that meeting. I'm like, who is fighting to get into a meeting? Everyone I know is like, I'm going to avoid that meeting.
I mean, that's a very funny point. But I do get that they're trying to earn their place on the crew.
Yeah. But it just made me laugh. Like, everybody I talk to every day is like, nope. Do I have to be there? Could this be a text?
I mean,
Right.
they missed the opportunity that the EMH should have been trying to get into that meeting too, because he was so out of the loop later, and he wants to be in the loop. Before they hired Bob Picardo, they expected the Doctor to be the least used member of the cast.
Yeah.
But then they hired Bob Picardo, and they use him a lot because you have to, because it's Bob Picardo.
Yeah.
So I think the concept of the EMH being out of the loop and isolated makes a lot of sense. But I think once you hire Bob Picardo, you figure out a way to use him in the show more instead of just keeping him isolated. Yeah. I noticed the first time we saw the fuzzy ship in the event horizon. I didn't remember this episode. Like I said, this wasn't one of the VHS ones I watched over and over again. But in the first shot of the ship in the event horizon, I was like, I think that looks a little bit like Voyager. Second time they came back to it, I knew it was Voyager. Shane, did you remember this was Voyager right off the bat?
No, I couldn't remember if it was Voyager or if it was like a fake out and it was a different ship. But then once I heard the scrambled message, my ears are tuned to Kate Mulgrew's voice. So like the second I heard a snippet, I'm like, that's her. It's Voyager. But then I couldn't remember if it was really Voyager or if it was just like an echo.
Steven, did you figure it out quickly or was it late in the episode?
It was around the same point when we started hearing the playback. But initially I did not. I thought it was going to be some other ship, ghost ship or something that had been there before or whatever. So yeah.
I mean, I think them asking Neelix, have you ever seen a ship like that, is a good misdirection.
Yeah.
That's the problem with watching this on an HD television. I know they haven't upgraded it. It's still standard definition. But I think if you're watching it on an old square tube TV, there's no way you're thinking that's Voyager until they reveal it.
Yeah.
Other than if you've got the audio tuned.
Yeah.
I did love this. This is another example when they were in the ready room the second time. Another great example of science Captain Janeway, where she was like, she knew exactly what was happening, more or less. She knew exactly what was going on. And while she didn't exactly know how to fix it, she was well versed in, temporal phenomena and, anything time travel I love. So
explain to Paris what was going on. Is a thing that sets Janeway apart from the other captains we've seen is she was the science officer before she was a captain, and I think I don't know if that's been made obvious in the show yet, but I think this episode was telling us like, yeah, she knows this stuff.
It did make me think about, we talk about just think about Kirk's previous jobs before he was captain and Picard and all those guys. And I very much enjoyed her and Torres's conversations as they're figuring it out. I thought it was some great Bechdel test passing stuff because they weren't talking about guys then or on the shuttle, and so they were talking all the science and
unless they were talking about Punch and Carry, but yeah, in a romantic sense,
right? So I thought as gobbledygook technobabble goes, I thought it was really good and believable, especially the how excited they were and all that kind of stuff, figuring out and stuff. So I enjoyed that.
Yeah. The technobabble stuff was great. The whole staff meeting was great. I noticed Carrie was in the first meeting they had in the conference room where they were dealing with the issue. But then the second, once Torres had an idea, he was no longer there. And I feel like that was just a budget of not wanting to use your guest star more days than you had to.
Yeah.
Because it didn't seem like there was a point yet where you start cutting Carrie out logistically.
Maybe Carrie's the one guy on the ship who doesn't want to be at every meeting. He's like,
Right,
you know
right.
what? Are you going? All right. You know what? I'll stay down here.
As Janeway explains the whole thing to Paris, she talks about how effect can precede cause, which I thought was a very interesting concept.
Yes.
Especially for Shane and his time travel brain.
Love it. Love it.
I thought that was good too.
Torres was actually pretty gracious in the first conference room meeting. When she came up with the idea, she didn't want to step on Carrie's toes, and she deferred, which you could read as like women having to defer to men to have their voices heard, but I didn't read it that way. I wish we had a female voice to tell me if I should have. But I read it as like, oh, she knows she screwed up. She's going to be a little more reserved, but she's also going to speak up when she has a good idea. And I appreciated that, the dynamic as I saw it in that room. I also liked Janeway's just nod to Chakotay about Torres after that. Instead of making that that didn't need to be a conversation.
Yeah.
Even though we wanted the other conversation fleshed out more, that point a nod was plenty.
Yeah, I immediately thought of the meme where it's the guy in the woods just.
Oh, the Jeremiah Johnson.
Yeah.
One thing we skipped over, but it was kind of background. So Seska was on the bridge early in the episode when things were going down. But then when Torres and Carrie have their fine engineering, Seska was again there in the background. And I really
all along.
I really noticed. Yeah, there should be an Agatha All Along song about Seska. That would be awesome. You don't even know how right you are, Steven. It would be awesome to do a song like that. So I really noticed they made a point of including Seska majorly in this episode. Like, here's a sign of she's important and not just a throwaway. Yeah. Like we sometimes get with background characters. But also what was really weird about this episode, and this is something Steven won't figure out, she wore a blue uniform, science and medical. This is the only episode I'm pretty sure she's in a blue uniform. The rest of the series she's in gold because she is an engineer. And I don't think that was clear in this episode, which would make sense why she's in engineering. I feel like this episode, they almost made you feel like she was science, but she's an engineer. They just had her the wrong color for one
They probably just ran out of uniforms and they're, replicators are low, so they couldn't, couldn't
or
replicate
they just
the
didn't figure out what the Seska story fully was yet.
Well, that's
like,
a logical explanation.
Yes.
Yeah. I think it was, let's work her in, but we don't yet know how it all locks into place.
My complaint here was that I don't know kilometers, so they kept using it's 1,000 kilometers. I'm like, I don't know how far that is.
I mean, I get that, Shane, but if you've been watching Star Trek, they've been talking kilometers since the 60s.
Yeah,
so at this point, I just let it roll over my head and ignore it. That is certainly not new for the Star Trek franchise.
Yeah.
They figure out it's a temporal reflection, and Janeway figured it out because, again, science captain.
Right.
Awesome hero. Good use of your captain. They get in the shuttle, and Janeway figures out which ship is real because it's the one that's waiting for them, and she has confidence that Chakotay is going to wait for them. And I think it's a really good personality thing that Torres is like, nope, they're leaving without us. And Janeway's like, nope, they're waiting.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that Janeway knows Chakotay better than Torres knows Chakotay. But Chakotay's locked back into his Starfleet officer training.
I think it's the Starfleet in him that's like, yes, if it was a Maquis event, she probably would have been right, but since it was a Starfleet event, it was Janeway knew.
I think you're absolutely right. I did wonder though, when they landed on the ship, there was still some doubt with Torres and Janeway about whether they were on the real Voyager or the mirror Voyager, and it seemed like they waited until they comm badged the bridge to make sure they were on the right ship. Wouldn't it have been like solidly landing on the deck that proved it wasn't the mirror image? Because
they would have just flown right through, nothing.
Right.
Yeah.
And also, if they had landed on the mirror one and it was solid, so let's say they're both solid, because maybe they were, instead of one being a ethereal reflection you can fly through. If they landed on a solid past Voyager, and I'm not sure if they could, or if it would just fly through. But if they did land on a solid one, then they would have remembered that they had already landed on the solid one, right?
Huh.
So you don't need to land and then call. Either you fly through it because it's a reflection, or you remember in the past that Janeway and Torres already landed on the wrong Voyager.
Yeah, yeah. Or, do a grazing phaser,
But that's a great idea, Shane. If you just fired a low beam phaser to test,
Yeah.
that's really smart.
That's what I was thinking the whole time. It was like, well, if it's an echo and it's not actually there, yeah, your beam would go right through it. Speaking of beams, by the way, Dechion beam. There's only been one other time a Dechion beam has been mentioned, and it was in Next Gen episode, and it was a very similar event.
Shane did his research.
I did
What
my research
episode
on
is that?
Cause and effect.
Oh yeah. Okay. That
So
was one where the Enterprise kept blowing up.
Yeah, so they
That makes sense.
a temporal causality loop, and
I
they use
remember that one well.
yeah. Well, the interesting thing is in universe, so that happened in 2368. This happened in 2371. So it was only 3 years later.
hmm
So
okay.
was Janeway aware of that, and that's how she knew kind of some of the stuff? B'Elanna certainly probably wouldn't have known that because she was out of Starfleet. So that just goes to show her level of intelligence, I think.
There's hundreds of ships in Starfleet, so I don't know that you'd read every captain's log and pay attention to everything. Although Janeway being a scientist makes it more likely she would have seen that report.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Um,
That's a good
uh,
question that I don't think we can have a clear answer on. Kind of think they should have been able to download. They should have already had these personnel files, whether they were hunting them or not, because how many people are there in the galaxy? How much data files take up of personnel? But I do like the in-canon explanation when they thought computer space would be so limited. They're like, oh, we have your file because we were hunting you specifically.
Yeah.
That makes sense. You have the Maquis personnel
Right.
files.
Yeah. And maybe I'm getting ahead. So when Janeway and Torres get in the shuttlecraft, so Paris is like, well, you're going to need the best shuttle, the best pilot for a shuttle. And she's like, well, unless you know about temporal mechanics, but don't they still need a good pilot? Shouldn't it be Paris and Torres?
You make
Technically.
a good point. I just so much
I
enjoy
know-
Janeway shutting down the privileged, arrogant white man that
I know this is very important too, but so I guess, but I was like, you just said you need a really good pilot, but all right.
First mission out in nowhere, and you decide to go on a maybe dangerous mission. The captain, like, okay.
Yeah. Well, she does
I've
dismiss it.
got
She
more
said
notes about that in the next
getting there is
episode,
the
but
easy
yes.
part, but
Yeah.
Janeway's science knowledge made it make more sense this time
mhm.
that she went than in the next Voyager episode that we'll get to
Okay.
later. But yeah, Next Gen, they made a big deal out of Riker was the one that always went on the away missions instead of
Mhm.
Picard.
Yeah.
Whereas in the original, Kirk always beamed down himself with Spock. They always put like the top several
Yep.
officers in danger.
Yep.
Next Gen took a step back. The explanation I would give in canon for why Janeway is in more danger than Picard is with Picard, you've got a ship of 1,000. With Voyager, you've got a ship of 150.
Yeah.
The captain's a little more hands-on. It's a
Mhm.
little less
Okay.
cruise ship director and a little more exploration ship
Mhm.
captain.
Yep.
Cisco gets involved in all the stuff in DS9. It's not directly Bajorn related, but again, I think they're different circumstances. I totally buy in canon that it makes sense for Picard to stay behind and these other captains to be in the front. Although, 75-year trip, you should probably start making Janeway hang back a little more.
Try telling her that.
Yeah.
I liked Janeway's line about sometimes you just have to punch through. I think it was really good character development for her. This was a really good Janeway character development episode to really see what she's like as a captain.
Yeah.
So was Caretaker, but
Yeah.
this was really good on that.
I thought so.
Also, a really good Torres development episode
Mhm.
and a secondarily good Torres development episode, I think. Or sorry, I said Torres top tier. Chakotay and the Doctor, second tier development. Janeway and Torres, first tier development in this.
Yeah.
We have two
I
more
don't know what
notes.
that note.
This one's going back when they first hit the singularity or whatever, and we're using the shaky cam. I actually like that. I like it better than people just flying around, statically. The ship's static, but everybody's moving. The camera isn't moving as much.
Yeah.
They did
on a
talk
big
about
screen, it might make me sick, but my screen's not that big. So.
they did talk about in the Delta Flyers podcast and stuff that the Voyager crew got some flack for these first couple episodes of how they shook whenever the ship was hit.
Oh
And
yeah.
one of the next gen directors came in and did like a training course with them of this is how you shake when the ship is hit. That wouldn't affect the camera operator, but in terms of the crew, both Garrett Wong and Robert Duncan McNeil are like, yeah, I think we got a lot better of shaking as the show went on.
I did notice during the one there was one guy who was just like somersaulting away from, and I'm like, what?
Always got to have your somersaulter. That
Yeah.
just makes it exciting. In terms of the shaky cam, we should give credit to the director, Kim Friedman, who's best known for directing 6 episodes of DS9, 4 episodes of Voyager, episode of LA Law, episode of Babylon 5, a lot of 1 and 2 offs on shows. In terms of whether we would have heard of her before in this podcast, she directed The Wire and The Jemadar in DS9 last season, as well as The Search Part 1 in DS9 this season. And then we'll go back to DS9 for a few episodes in season 5. For Voyager, this is her first directing credit, obviously. She has a couple more this season and another one in season 2. So somebody that was working for a couple years in the Trek universe. No next gen, though. So she just came in for DS9 and Voyager here.
Nice.
And they used her, a handful of times in a couple of years. Torres apologizes to Carrie, and he softens a little. I just thought it was too easy of him falling in line and respecting her. I was expecting him more, and this may be more of my impression. Carrie can be a bit of a jerk, as Shane mentioned. I expect him to be like, I'm going to listen to you for now, but I'm watching you, or don't screw up.
Yeah.
And I do kind of appreciate he didn't actually say that. I do kind of appreciate, like, Starfleet character going to accept the situation and make their best. But I think if this was a show that wasn't Star Trek, he would have put in that, I'm going to be watching you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to get...
Along these lines, my alternate episode was that he hits her back. It's the 24th century. Yeah. It's all game.
As a half Klingon, she probably would have respected him more for that.
Exactly.
True.
He would have been more.
And then we could have had a romantic relationship between the two of them, which obviously is not what happens. But maybe it would have.
He dishonored her by not hitting her. He dishonored half of her.
Well, she would have never been satisfied with him anyway, because we know Klingons have 2, and he's only got 1 little. I would assume their average length is also smaller than human. I don't know, though. Maybe if you got 2, they're small. Anyway, I don't think we talked about the actor behind Carrie yet, in either the pilot or this, because he was in the pilot so briefly. Josh Clark, best known for McFarlane USA, is the only credit IMDb has at the top under known for, but he has 87 credits. Okay. The last being a Law and Order episode in 2022. So, acted a couple of years ago, although his most recent pictures look really old on IMDb. Like, he seems to have aged a lot in the last few years.
Wow.
He was in a couple episodes of Westworld a few years ago on HBO. I don't remember him from that, but again, given how different he looks now, I might have to go back and look. He did an episode of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., episode of Grey's Anatomy, episode of Mad Men. So he got the guest star in all the great shows. Modern Family, Shameless, Scandal. Yeah, he had lots of credits after this one. I mean, I never hated Carrie in Voyager. And in fact, he once came to Starbase Columbus in Columbus, Ohio, and I met him in person and have his autographed photo in my house. One of 3 Star Trek actors I have an autographed photo from. Him and Bob Picardo, the Doctor. And then I can't remember who the third one is. I'd have to go look. But yeah, those are people that I've met and signed. I'm not big into autographs and selfies, but in that day, that was like, if we met him, that's all you could do, because it was like the 90s and I was a kid. I think Voyager was still in the air when I went to Starbase Columbus.
Wow.
So, yeah, that was that. The fact that Starbase Columbus even got somebody at that stature to come into Columbus for him, I think was pretty good too. Even though some people may say, "Is that all you got?" Well, Starbase Columbus was a tiny shop. Yeah, but it was awesome. I miss it. I'm so sad it went out of business.
Yeah, it's a cool place.
Towards the end, there's a Chakotay asked Janeway, if their positions were reversed, would you serve under me? Which, first of all, the Maquis ship can't hold all those Starfleet officers. But second of all, I loved Janeway's non-response of Captain's privilege. I don't have to answer. Because I think her answer is no.
Yeah.
I think in a practical sense, If she had no other choice, it was just a few people, she would have answered yes. But I think that's the 10% or 5% likelihood. I think 95% of circumstances she would have said no. And I think she's smart not to say that.
Mm-hmm. She had a little cheeky response. And yeah, I wrote my last note of the episode. Yay, mommy and daddy made up.
Janeway and Chakotay, I love their working relationship as the series gets going. We'll see how it develops, but hey, let's get to the rankings. Who is your annoyance in this episode?
Neelix.
Agreed.
I mean, he only had the one appearance, I think, maybe two, but I was just like, enough of you already.
He had two.
Okay.
But yeah, him crashing the briefing and then not even really contributing in that moment. And then his mansplaining to Cass on the bridge. It's Neelix for me. Shane?
I gotta say Carrie, which is probably the intention, but just it was, for the time and everything they're going through, like everyone else is really chill, and he was like antagonistic for seemingly no reason. I mean, I get it, he wants the position, but yeah, he was just kind of a butthead.
I've been putting myself in his shoes. I could see why he feels he deserves the position and she doesn't. And so that's where I have a hard time pitting him as annoying, because I do feel like in this instance, totally reasonable to give it to Torres for reasons outside of the chain of command. But also, you're going to feel disappointed and rejected. It might have been better to give them more of a competition or co-chair or evaluate them over time. The gender thing makes it more like, oh, we should just support Torres. But if you take gender out of it, I think maybe there should have either been a compromise or a period where they both had more of a chance to compete, even though clearly B'Elanna exited this episode ahead of the game.
Yeah. Well, it's the future. Misogyny doesn't exist anymore, so.
That's right.
It would be so nice.
Yeah.
It would be so nice if we can elect a woman president instead of a 34 times convicted felon adjudicated rapist. And anyway, who are you having a drink with?
Going against what we've been talking about, Carrie. I'm going to go with Carrie. Be like, hey, buddy, sorry you got demoted.
See, I'm having a drink with Torres because she's had a rough day, but she made it through, and I'm ready to celebrate with her and buy her a round.
Short doctor.
He's going to need a drink. He's having a bad day.
Yeah.
And nobody's paying attention or giving him any.
I know the effects were terrible, but man, that was hilarious to see. He's just.
And also, there was the distorted visual wide instead of just short makes no sense. But then they gave him a distorted voice at the end. Instead of, like, if you just shrink him exponentially, his voice would have never changed.
Yeah.
So weird. And then for Voyager, we have the new thing. Who is your inspiring character of the episode?
Janeway.
For 2 episodes in a row, I'm picking Janeway. She was a great leader.
I fell in love with her, yeah.
Made all the right decisions and rose above any reasonable person. Torres gave a reasonable person a reason to dismiss her. But Janeway showed her true leadership and judgment and overlooking the attitude and the flare-ups and the everything and choosing her based on skills in a very objective way instead of subjective. So I got to give it to Janeway.
I'd say Janeway too, but just for fun, I'll say Tuvok, because while he didn't have a large role, he being a Vulcan, of course, but he took his lick with stride. He licked his wound with stride. I was just like, even though he was probably in the right, Chakotay's like, I'm pulling rank. He's like, okay, I respect that. I'm still going to write my report.
Torres in the brig for 75 years.
It's just probably 2 months. Yeah.
Can't respect that. Now, I think we're seeing already the difference between Tuvok and Spock. The difference between a full-blooded Vulcan and a half Vulcan. I think Tuvok's a little more willing to give in to his emotion, even though he pretends he has none. Whereas Spock always tried really hard not to give in because he was trying to prove himself. Tuvok's comfortable being a Vulcan, so he can let his pettiness shine through here and there. I know Tuvok is Keith's favorite character. I wish he was here to defend him, but yeah. Ranking the episode, better or worse than Caretaker?
Ooh.
I have to admit, I'm kind of torn.
Yeah.
I'd say better, just because it's Well, it's one episode instead of two, which if for people, not me, but people with short attention spans, that's cool. And also, again, it felt more just you classic Trek episode, just boom. Oh, I forgot one note was a space hole. Yeah,
Nice.
yeah.
Yeah, I had it down as better. Now that we're talking through and I remember some of the good points of Caretaker, I'm a little more divided, but I do think it might edge out Caretaker. I think it was a really solid episode.
I would go Caretaker, but yeah.
Do you think it by much, or do you think Caretaker being the pilot maybe slightly?
Not by as much as when we first sat down tonight.
Okay.
So, they're talking.
Come around.
As often happens.
I guess I did not
talk
discuss
about
my alternate episode, which was it would have been fun if in the second episode, while they had a crisis, for instance, the ship being stuck in a thing and maybe disappearing, we had an actual Maquis mutiny on board. I think that would have been a really cool B plot to work in. I know you wouldn't have room to do the Torres character development plot. That would have been a choice instead of the Torres plot. But I think it would have been really cool to do a Maquis mutiny in the second episode during an emergency and then deal with the chief engineer in episode 3. Any other alternate? Steven, did you have an alternate episode? Usually do.
Yeah, it was that Carrie hit her back.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, brawl in engineering. And probably somebody damaged the warp core during the fight, no doubt.
Oh my god. Well, we know Data and Geordi just use dangerous lasers right next to the warp core, so no big danger to the warp core.
Can always eject it.
Yep, there you
go. You can, but Voyager was 75 years to go home. You eject the warp core. That's now 15,000 years. 75. Next week, Deep Space Nine, life support. Dr. Bashir must use extraordinary measures to prolong Viti Parial's life long enough to allow Parial to complete sensitive peace negotiations between the Bajorans and the Cardassians. Until then, live long.
And live long, and prosper.
It's All Been Done presents
Who's Got the Time?